Welcome to Talent Titans, the podcast where we bring you entrepreneurs and leaders from the global staffing industry. I'm your host, Suky Sodhi. Now let's jump right on in and welcome today's Titan.
Hi, welcome back to another episode of Talent Titans. Our guest today is another disruptor for the staffing industry. I have Julian from Talin with me today. Welcome, Julian.
Thank you very much for having me, Suki. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it, and thanks for running an awesome Canadian Staffing Summit in April.
Thank you.
I had a lot of fun.
Great. Well, you know what? That was our third sellout, and the rest are going to sell out. So, hey, shameless plug. April the 16th next year. Get that locked in, everybody. Julian, people who don't know you, who are you?
Yeah, so I am a recruiter tech founder, but before that, actually didn't come from the agency world or recruiting world at all. Actually, I spent close to a decade as a growth marketer, helping early stage VC backed SaaS companies grow, and so that's who I was in my kind of past life. And through doing that and actually advising technology companies, very organically kind of asked me to help with recruiting internally. And that led to me spinning out a recruiting agency arm to my consultancy. And that was my foray into the world of recruiting. And then the light bulbs started to go off. And once I had this idea for Talin in my head, I couldn't get it out. And that led to starting Talin. And 3.5 years later, here we are.
Amazing. So there's a couple of things I want to point out here. First, you are Canadian.
Correct.
Right?
Born and raised in Toronto, specifically in Etobicoke. So.
Yeah, even at the summit, I like it's a Canadian staffing summit. It's elevating the Canadian staffing industry. So that's something that's really important to me. And I don't have people just because they are Canadian, but I just love the fact that we've got a Canadian startup here that's going places in our industry. So there's a couple of things I want to say right off the bat here. I love the fact that you have some exposure to quote unquote the staffing industry, so you know what it feels like on this side of the desk, so to speak. Because I speak to, as you can imagine, on my advisory side, and we were just talking about this before we started recording. As another company that I was talking to in terms of advisory, and they're disrupting the staffing industry as well, and they don't come from staffing, and part of me really likes that because it's like a fresh pair of eyes, so to speak. But they don't understand staffing, which is really working against them. So I really like the fact that you have that exposure to both. Now, I want to be fair to those startups and platforms and founders that don't come from staffing, but they've gone and got the expertise, or they've surrounded themselves. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, let me just ask you this right off the bat. Is the goal to replace staffing agents? Because we all hear, oh, they're coming for our jobs. Is that the ultimate goal for you?
No, it is not. The ultimate goal for us is, in a future where, especially, you look at internal talent acquisition teams that are arming themselves with every AI capability under the sun available to them right now. I can tell you from experience, a number of them have in their heads that they will one day not need, external help from recruiting agencies, right? I think that a good chunk of them believe that. I disagree.
They've always believed that.
They've always kind of believed it, but now we're in this paradigm shift of, this technology that's commercially available, which is, this giant leap in terms of what we can do from an automation perspective, especially, right? I think, and I know that staffing and recruiting agencies, because of hopefully companies like us, will have access to the exact same technology that talent acquisition teams have. However, the dynamic between candidate to recruiter that's independent of a single company, that's part of an agency, that dynamic will always be different from the dynamic of an agency, or sorry, rather from an internal TA or an internal recruiter to a candidate. And that is kind of where the difference is going to lie. And there's a lot of opportunity to offer value to a candidate that you can't really offer from just a company straight up to a candidate. So I'm building for that future, to making sure that agencies have access to tier one technology so that they can keep up with what internal TA is
I
doing
love
right now.
that, because here's the thing: we coexist, right? The staffing industry, in my opinion, could not survive without internal, and vice versa, right?
Absolutely.
It
Yeah.
might mean you may not be doing 20 hires a year, you may only be doing 3, but from a candidate perspective, candidates want choices,
Hmm.
right? They want choices. They want to quote unquote have interviewed with a few employers and all of that stuff. However, bringing it back to tech, unless as a staffing agency, if you don't have the right tech, you're way back there, right?
Hmm.
So with that in mind, if Talin or any other AI powered platform reaches its full potential, where does the traditional staffing model break? What aspects of their current value proposition kind of come obsolete, right? But and then on the other side, what new opportunities does that create, and potential threats? I know there's so many questions loaded
Yeah,
into that
yeah,
one,
yeah, of course.
but that we all know the quote unquote the traditional recruiting model is a dying model. And there's some people that are clinging on to it for dear life. I get that. That's up
Hmm.
to them. But the truth of the matter is the model is broken. Tech has disrupted it. It's broken it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's something I think about a lot, because
Hmm.
obviously how our customers' business model changes now and in the future will affect how how our business model, right, with our own customers as well. There, it's all kind of linked. So we spend a lot of time thinking about this, right? Like, yeah, that contingent model, 20-25% of someone's base salary, right? I think eventually that probably goes away. You are probably the arena where that will continue to make sense will be like an executive, I would
Okay.
think, just simply because of the fact that there are, the pool of talent that can actually do those jobs is so small, and that relationship, let's say that an agency has with a CFO
Yep.
or a CMO or what have you, is so valuable that it will continue to be able to command this high dollar price just because the supply is so finite. So that is the corner I think will kind of remain unchanged, or will remain less changed for longer, let's say.
Hmm.
I mean, the model that we're seeing kind of, proliferate, and I think, will continue to, is sort of this like on demand kind of, obviously very somewhat like retainer, but essentially a flat fee monthly. We're going to do X amount of, top of funnel engagement that can hire. We have packages for 5 salespeople a month, 5 to 10 salespeople a month, 15 to 20 salespeople a month. I'm seeing a lot of these younger, smaller recruiting firms kind of punching above their weight, who are offering those models that just for the customer brings down that cost per hire in terms of like per head. And these smaller recruiting firms have processized and used tech to scale, obviously, how many people they can reach out to, doing all of their list building, the intake process, right? Helping partially automate most of those things. So,
I'm thinking, as you were saying that
mhm,
the fees are going to come down, I went, right? Because it costs a lot of money to run a recruitment business, right? It's not cheap. Like if I just do mine, the office, we've got downtown office, 12, just under $12,000 a month, right?
mhm, yeah,
The cost, you have a team, I have this platform, that platform.
mhm,
It's like every other business, there is a huge cost, right? So when you said the fees would come down, I was like, oh dear God, right?
yeah. I mean, I think it's, again, I think it really like pricing is always dependent on supply and demand
Yep.
at the end of the day, right? If I think for certain roles where the bottleneck to get those roles filled is simply like labor, right? And like, for example, and that's where I'm thinking like these mid to entry level roles will probably have a tougher time if it's
That I
like
agree with.
if it's like let's say I'm a VP of sales and I need to hire 10 account executives this quarter, right? And my pool of and let's say we're fully remote, so my pool of account executives I can hire is pretty big. You are probably going to be able to get those hires done through more effectively through like automation and bring down that average cost per hire.
Okay, because I'm glad that's where you went, because I do agree those repetitive tasks,
Hmm.
albeit important, but repetitive tasks. Yeah, 100%, I agree. That's where the break's going to happen, because you don't need those individuals. So another example I'll give is RPO, especially
Hmm.
when you have you're using an offshore company in Philippines, India, South America, and all they're doing is quote unquote your list building. All of that can get automated. So I do
Absolutely.
agree with you. That's where that break is going to happen. I'm not too sure I agree with you on the fee piece, and I'll tell you for why.
Hmm.
Clients and candidates, certainly in my lifetime, still want that human interaction.
Hmm.
Okay. And it is more than just, does this CV match the job description,
Hmm.
right? Because I can tell you right now, client says, here's my 5 wish list. Person had this, right? And then they go and hire that, and you're like, what?
Hmm.
Right? Because it's that human interaction piece. It's that when they meet and things like that. I can't help but feel those ones that are going to sustain their fees are going to be the ones that really understand that part and perfect that part.
Oh, absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about like this value. It's
Yeah.
like it's like IP,
Yeah.
right? Like let's go back to like the sales recruiter perspective. If, a VP of sales says to me, I want traits, 1 through 5, just get me these check boxes, but then you as a recruiter have hired hundreds of salespeople in a particular niche, let's say, throughout your career, you say, I'm going to advise you that we should also look for check mark 6, 7, and 8,
Yeah.
because these are the people who hit quota and have always throughout my entire career. And you start to present candidates that have those additional pieces that you can really only, and maybe those are traits that you only get on a screening call, spending 30 minutes or 45 minutes with a candidate. I consider that like IP.
Yeah.
Where I think technology comes into play is eventually you'll have, and a lot of the note takers and things like that are going to start to do this, where you will be able to train your own personally on what those things are, and it will just help you identify them like quicker and easier. But again, the nice part is like that's your sort of IP
Yeah.
still. You have a
Yeah.
tool helping you enable that, but that's yours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like the hard part, or not the hard part, but rather the goal of a lot of this stuff in the near to medium term is figuring out sort of the bottlenecks of those repetitive tasks,
Yep.
and making sure you lose zero quality on the human centered interactions
That's
that
the
kind of
key
happen.
part. That is the key part, because ultimately, even if you've got the researcher part automated, garbage in, garbage out.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So what was I don't, and don't quote me, but I was speaking with an individual in the US yesterday, and he was telling me workdays have got into trouble, right?
Hmm.
Some class law action, and it's all about around that sourcing part, right?
Hmm.
So it is garbage in, garbage out. So I don't want people to listen to this and say, hey, I'm just going to go and buy platform A, implement it as is, because that's the stuff that gets you into trouble. But if you don't
Oh yeah.
have that human centric part throughout every process, albeit it might be automated,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
So let me give an example of what I mean. DEI. No,
Hmm.
forget DEI, employment legislation. Forget DEI for a second.
Hmm.
Let's just go employment legislation, right?
Hmm.
If you haven't trained your tech, the local employment legislation laws,
Hmm.
because what's legal here might not be legal here, right? So if
Yep.
you're recruiting outside, your territory is wider, even different state, let alone internationally. Even at
Hmm.
that stage, if you have not participated in that human element part of it, right? Giving
Hmm.
it that level of knowledge, you're not going to have a business for long. So tech isn't going to replace that. In other words,
Yeah.
tech's going
Uh,
to get you into trouble, actually, in that sense.
Absolutely, right? Like anytime, and like one of the things when I'm on demos with customers, they almost always lay out their whole tech stack and will kind of ask, how does it look? Or like, can I get like some, almost like we do almost consulting on like
Yeah,
their choice of sort of tech stack. And a lot of times you just see, these thrown together tech stacks based on the promise it will do kind of XYZ. Meanwhile, like the actual whether or not they fit together and accomplish the objective that you're looking for is a pretty nuanced thing that requires like a lot of expertise. So what I always say to firms is like a really good tech stack, you have to pilot it, and you have to, the thing you're looking for is not for it to necessarily replace or automate an entire process 100%. It's figuring out, if I apply it to process A, can I, number one, maintain the quality of my output so that it is just as good? I'm not
yep,
suffering any atrophy around the output. And what percentage of that am I automating? Right? Let's look at sourcing. Like we have an AI sourcing module. We also have like an AI BD list building module that builds like lists of hiring managers or candidates using AI. Just upload the job description. Is it going to get you a 100% perfect list of candidates or hiring managers? No. And there's no platform on earth that I've ever tested that can do that. Is it 80% good? And now you have a nice finite list of, let's say, 90 candidates that you now need to go and parse 90 into maybe 65 candidates or 70 candidates, and you've automated 70, 80% of the labor to get there. That's what you're looking for when it
yeah.
comes to implementing a lot of these AI solutions.
But I think
Yeah.
also, and I'd love to see your experience. Larger agencies, yes, they have quote unquote their tech team,
Hmm.
right? They're the tech experts, so they're part of the buying decision making process. But smaller agencies, mid-sized agencies, we don't have the luxury of having somebody full time who's dedicated to technology,
Hmm.
right? Whose job solely is for technology. Now, I'm really fortunate. I back up. I'm in that position. I don't have a full time quote unquote tech person,
Hmm.
but I'm in a fortunate position. My husband's in the space and my son loves that space. So I always go to
Hmm.
them, say,
Hmm.
how does this work and what have you? My question is this: not everybody, a lot of people don't have that luxury. So what I'm seeing on the coaching side is they talk to company A, they're like, oh, we really like that. So they implement that tech. Then company B comes along and there's kind of an overlap and it's kind of not, and then they implement that.
Hmm.
And it gets the end job done, but it's not a streamlined process. They haven't looked at it holistically. That's the word I'm looking
Hmm.
for,
Hmm.
right? Are you finding that? So people are talking to you and saying, "Yeah, I got that because it done this little part, although it does all of that, but we thought it was going to solve this one problem, and then they got this piece of tech over here, and it solves two or three more problems, and they're just like, yeah, and we're paying like $2,000 a month when they don't need to."
Yeah, I mean, constantly. And if I now there's a lot of reasons as to
Hmm.
why a company can kind of end up there, but I'll tell you in my experience, the number one reason that they end up in the situation you just described is adoption and issues with adoption. And that could be a combination. And this is something I like post about or talk about a lot on LinkedIn in general. But you know, when it comes to adoption, it's you need a combo. You need two things, right? You need the technology to be user friendly and well integrated with your current tech stack, etc. That's on the responsibility of the tech vendor. But then on your side, you need a workforce or a team that is has a certain level of acumen and a certain level of like just desire and effort they're willing to put in to sort of make it happen. And I've seen situations where the team has that desire and the acumen is there. The tool just does not do a great job of sort of fulfilling it. I've seen ones where the opposite is true, where the tech is solid, it's good technology, it works well, doesn't require a degree in rocket science to use it, but the team is just woefully behind the standard of where I think every recruiting team needs to be today. And that team has to look in the mirror and has some work to do. And then, of course, like there's a combination of the two that can kind of also happen. So yeah, it's like kind of an interesting like landscape and spectrum that you'll
But
see there.
a couple of thoughts went through my mind as you were saying that. One, I'm now talking to the quote unquote uneducated buyer, the me really, right? I don't care
Mm-hmm.
how tech, I really don't have an interest in how tech works. I need to
Mm-hmm.
know it works
Mm-hmm.
and it solves a business problem for me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what advice would you give to now? As I said, I'm fortunate. I've got Peter to. I always run everything past, and he gets involved. But those that don't have that trusted source,
Mm-hmm.
salespeople, doesn't matter whether we're selling tech, recruiting services, soft, laptop,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, right? We are naturally salespeople.
Yep.
We're naturally salespeople.
Yep.
So, what piece of advice would you give to somebody who knows they got to do tech, aren't necessarily quote unquote tech savvy, and they're talking to tech guys who are doing their job, they're trying to close the deal? What's the kind of questions they should be asking?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it really starts even before that. And
Okay.
it's really about a mindset shift of how you approach technology in your day to day. I
Okay.
totally agree with you. I'd say most of how it works under the hood isn't really that relevant. The part of how it works that's important is understanding sort of just like the, hey, this thing is roughly built in this way, and I know that it'll behave in a certain way, and in other ways it won't behave in that way, right? That's an important sort of baseline to understand. But for anyone, and this is, especially if you've been in the game, so to speak, for like a long time, it's hard to like mindset shift like later in your career. Although I've seen some recruiters do it so well at the same time.
I'm
It
laughing because, sorry to interrupt, yesterday I was telling my husband about piece of tech. Company reached out to me and I forwarded to him. And as he was dropping me off at the station this morning, we were talking about it. And I was like, the guy was using this word. He was saying, this is the latest this, right? And I admit, right? That's not my area of expertise.
yeah.
So he said something. I was like, yeah, that kind of sounds like it, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what you got to remember is we, the me's of this world, we know recruiting, we know staffing,
Mm,
we know how to get the best talent, right? We know how to run these global businesses and stuff like that. We're not tech people. So I want to come back and just do a deeper dive on that question. So I get it. You say you need to know how it works,
mhm.
but surely there's got to be a point in the process where when they say this is how it works, right? It's built on X platform, Y, whatever, whatever. If you don't know what it is, surely at that stage you've got to pause the process and go and find out or find somebody that knows what that is. No?
It's like I try to give an example of what's important to know versus what's not important to know. Like let's use, well, because it's an easy example, let's use like AI sourcing. Let's say I'm
Yep.
using an app that says we do AI sourcing, we build you lists of candidates. Right, like knowing, and let's go back to like that 80% sort of thing, knowing that that technology is designed to essentially get you a short list, maybe with some like ranking data, but that there's an error rate, and let's say that error rate is 15%. Knowing that before you kind of get into it, or taking the time to look into things like that, now means how you interact with that app is going to fundamentally change, and you'll be able to use it correctly. I have seen recruiters who said, hey, like we built this list, it gave us 50 candidates, 5 of them were irrelevant, and so I don't think your app works. And we're just there, we're like, no, 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 that's the goal here is not perfection. You have to understand, like, to get 50 candidates at a 90% accuracy rate would have taken an expert
Yeah.
sourcer hours. Now, this is where, like, do you know what I mean? Like, That's you don't an example. Something you do not need to know. You do not need to know that the tech language that it's built on. It's built on Python. Does not matter, right? Stuff like that. The really nitty gritty technical aspects. What large language model are they using to to deploy like some of the AI functionality? They're using Claude. They're using ChatGPT. They're using Mistral. Does not matter. Like, you don't care unless you're going to try to build workflows with AI like from scratch. You don't care about that. So it's like learning like how it works in terms of a behavioral aspect, not in terms of a technical
That's great
aspect.
advice, because that's where I was going, because we're not experts in this now, and especially the smaller independent mid-size, that's where they're getting caught,
Hmm.
because they're thinking, well, we need to know how, either they need to know how everything works and all that nitty-gritty detail,
Yeah.
or they're just like taking it at face value, and then that creates that frustration, right? So it's finding that fine point. Like this weekend, we were looking for a car for me, and we went into BMW, which I absolutely loved, and then we went into the Mercedes dealership. The guy instantly went to my husband, my car. So you can tell I was
Hmm.
really annoyed here, right? Goes instantly to my husband. So first of all, woman greets me, great, and I was like, "That's the one I want to look at. Can we unlock it?" So she goes and says to this guy, she wants the car unlocked. And so the guy comes over, unlocks, doesn't acknowledge me, goes straight to my husband and starts talking how powerful the car is, and it da 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 da. And my
Yeah, yeah,
husband
yeah.
knows exactly what I'm thinking, and he's got that smile, and he actually said, it's her car, it's her decision.
Yep.
The guy instantly turns around to me and get this, and he says, "Oh, well, women only want to know how the car looks."
Oh my goodness.
I was like, oh my god, did you realize? I was done. I was done. I was done. I'll probably buy that car, but from a different dealership, right? But that's the, but that's it, right? It's understanding that technical piece. Truth of the
Yeah.
matter is, I don't care
Yeah.
about that technical part. That is the truth of the matter. But the assumption was made,
Yep.
right? So if you come bring it back to what I'm seeing happening
Hmm.
is,
Hmm.
there's a lot of assumptions that get made on both sides, right? And we have to own it, and anybody listening to this who is looking like another me, who's looking at it and looking at their tech stack, or understands they need to do more, I guess what we're saying is, you need to start with the fundamentals,
Hmm.
right? What's
Yeah.
the problem you're actually trying to solve? And don't
Yes.
be frightened of pushing back on the salesperson and saying, hey, I don't get this, I'm going to go and do some more homework, or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. And the goal of a good salesperson, and we're hiring a couple of salespeople right now, and this is like a core thing that we're looking for, is like a consultative like
Yeah.
approach, right? Like, we have quite literally done demos with customers where we just aren't really a good fit for what they're trying to accomplish, and we'll quite literally point them in the direction of a competitor and say, they do exactly what you're looking for. We are going to only partially kind of fulfill that sort of need. So, and I think you're spot on with like your advice there. It's like, if it doesn't make sense, and sticking to the fundamentals and drawing the parallel there, like, push back on the salesperson. Be like, I'm at X, I need to get to Y. I'm not seeing how I get there right now. Explain to me, show me how my problem kind of gets solved. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
because there's
would
so
totally
many
agree.
new shiny things coming out. Because I'm going to make an assumption here.
Hmm.
Because of that decision, it impacts the adoption as well, especially if you've got a younger
Course,
workforce.
course, absolutely. Like, and we've seen that too, where like, let's say management chooses a tool without consulting their frontline workers, and then once the tool kind of trickles down and say, hey guys, we're implementing this new engagement tool that we're going to use with for our BD efforts, and they go, yeah, but this is not how we do BD. Like, our process today requires engagement like X, Y, Z, and this is not allowing us to do any of those things. We have to change the way that we do BD, which we don't know works, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that, which kind of bring it for us full circle. That's why you have to pilot stuff, and that's why you have to bring in people who are using it day to day, put it in their hands, and you need to see them get excited about it.
Yeah. So I want to come back to the human interaction part, right?
Mm-hmm.
So many traditional staffing agencies, I'd say traditional general staffing agencies, pride themselves on that human interaction, right? That those relationships and those nuances, it's not what he said, it's how he said, or it's what they did not say, all of that stuff that we do every day that tech can't do.
Mm-hmm.
As AI becomes more sophisticated, how realistic is it, do you think, for technology companies to replicate or even surpass the human touch in recruitment? And where will the human element truly remain indispensable? So, do you
Yeah,
actually think it'll
that's a great
place?
question. I mean, the thing is, if you look into let's say, let's call 50 years the
Yep,
far future, right?
yep,
It's and I'm a technologist, I'm a techno optimist, right? I'll give you that. Telling this is my bias, right? This is the lens that I'm looking at it through,
yep,
right? Like if you look at the curve of technology, I mean, I'm sure we probably can't even imagine what we're going to kind of have in
yeah,
in 50 years, right? We could be doing this podcast, and I could be this me talking right now in this with this level of emotion and nuance and exit could be completely AI, and a human eye could not tell the difference whatsoever. Like that is theoretically very possible. In my opinion, it's a when that happens, not if that happens.
yeah, I
Now
agree
the
with that
now
one. Yep,
now the good news is that I do not think is in the near or medium term, right? I don't think we're 10 years away from that. I don't think we're 15 years away from that. Are we 20 years? Are we 25 years? It's incredibly difficult to kind of say, but my techno optimist viewpoint of this is we are in this window where these certain human centered elements aren't going to be touched necessarily, right? And I think, anything to do with elements around trust, elements around building rapport, certain elements around consultation, right? I can always, even now, I do this all the time. I can go into ChatGPT or Claude, and I'll have conversations with it to consult me on an approach to a problem, but that's not quite the same still as having maybe a seasoned vet in a specific area give me that consultation, right? So I think the way to look at it in the near to medium term is if you can do it on your computer, if it is clicking, copy, pasting, moving data around, structuring data, crafting messaging, it will be automated in the near term. Even let's take email writing for example. I can already use AI to write an email better than 90-95% of any recruiter. I can do that today. So that it's really important to kind of get our minds around where's the line between what's not going to be touched for a while and what sort of is. Yeah. So if you look at the recruitment process, so obviously that initial screening call, even though now there's a lot of these AI screeners and stuff like
yep,
that, maybe that's good for like a really high volume role where you got to screen 200 people. And instead of just getting resumes sitting in an ATS, sure, I'll let anybody do the AI screening tool because I don't really care. And I'll get really detailed analytics on everyone's 15-minute screening call that was done by AI. Maybe, but again, if it's an important role, you don't have that many candidates, etc. You're not running them through an AI screening. You can't do that to even a senior manager or a director.
yep,
You can't do that, right? So like that's one example of one area that I think the best of the best are still gonna, kind of
yeah.
continue to do.
As you were saying that,
Um,
the thought going through my mind was, and I said earlier, it's not going to replace, in our lifetime, not going to replace the me's of this world. But you're right. There is some really good AI out there, and you're like, is that a person? Is that? You're like you
mhm,
question it, right?
mhm.
But I'm yet to see it in an interaction
Yeah.
and really replicate that human part.
Yes.
What you're talking about is AI agents interview doing the screening 15-minute screen and things like that, I totally agree, because here's the truth of the matter. If I'm looking for a driver, for argument's sake,
Hmm.
right, high volume driver, I need to see their driving license. You either have a legal driving license or you don't, right?
Hmm.
You're either going to work for X, that kind of stuff where it's like tick tick tick. 100% agree that all of that can be automated. But anything that's going to involve, quote unquote, a culture fit into a team, that is where I agree with you. We have that window. How long that window is remains to be seen.
Hmm.
And those good recruiters are the ones that recognize that. They focus on that rather than saying, hey, I don't want to spend a couple of hundred a month on automating this. Because
Hmm.
you see it all the time. Well, they're coming for our jobs. Tech is coming for our jobs. I don't, yeah, if you're a transactional recruiter throwing enough crap at the wall, hoping something sticks, I agree. You are going to get replaced.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I think what before AI kind of like and again, this is something I don't think will happen. It's more like what jobs within the agency will it totally, kind of replace or automate. The first thing that you will see, and this is the thing to kind of look out for in the market, is you'll see smaller recruiting firms doing bigger numbers,
Yeah.
right? Let's say like for a perm team that's doing like mid-level to executive roles, if you make 2 placements a month, let's say, you're doing pretty well, right? Let's say you're billing 500K to a million a year, right? If you're doing 2 exec placements a
Yeah.
month, right? Look out for an executive recruiting firm where everyone's doing 5 placements a month
Yeah.
with the same number of people. And then another executive recruiting firm went out of business because they couldn't compete with the velocity that other exec recruiting firm was working with. That I think is going to happen like soon. That's in
I
the near term.
I'm seeing that happening. And I
It's
totally
already, I
agree
think
with
it's
you.
already happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because what's
Yeah.
happening is those quote unquote savvy, forward thinking owners, whether they're 20 years in the industry or 5 years in the industry, it really doesn't matter. The ones that are looking at it and saying is, okay, what's the piece that you can't put? Everybody can implement tech. Everyone can go and get chat GPT, boom, 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 done. Right? I know
Yep.
I've oversimplified it, but it gets the point across. So clients aren't paying you for that bit anymore because they're getting, if when all things are equal, your differentiator is price. But
Hmm.
where you're now using those same quote unquote headcount, because you don't need those sources anymore. They either got to transition to client candidate relationship people, or there's no job for them. But if you're using that same headcount and you're focusing your revenue generators, whether it's on the candidate side or the client side, and now they're having meaningful conversations rather than sitting there scrolling through LinkedIn or whatever database that they're using, that's where the money's happening. Because
Hmm.
now the quality has come through. They're not having to rescreen. Oh my God, I have no issues if tech found me 50 people and 5 were duff. I'd be like, hey, that in my mind, that's a really good return,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
A good
Absolutely.
salesperson isn't even going to make those 50, even if it isn't even going to get through 50, because they're going to be able to look at it and from what they know about their client, it's like, okay, these are the 10 people I'm going to talk to first. Right. So
Yeah.
that's where that money, and that's where those, use your example, instead of making 2 placements a month, they're making 5 placements. It's the people that are focusing on that. Look, I know we're coming up to time, but there is something
Hmm.
else I really want to touch on,
Hmm.
and I touched
Yeah.
on it earlier with the whole workdays thing. The impact tech is having on candidates,
Hmm.
right? And we hear it over and over again. They've got to key their CV into, they apply for a job, put your CV in, then they've got to go and do it again, and then they've got to manually, like, right? So beg your pardon, candidates are really frustrated with the adoption of tech in many ways. Do you see that? How do you see tech changing that candidate experience to a more positive candidate
I
experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the potential for the candidate experience or the user experience, right, of the candidate when they're engaging with a recruiter, of all these little processes that would take time to fill out a form, do XYZ, right? I mean, the ceiling is pretty high of just how streamlined that could be. And I think there's a long ways to go, especially some of these like ATSs that have been around for like a long time that aren't moving particularly quickly in especially like this area. um like it's a big deal that for to make it's a candidate's like mindset going into it. What does a candidate think, right, when they go, it's like, hey, can you fill out these fields in this form? It's going to take me 10 minutes to like fill out this form for like an intake interview that'll go to the ATS, and then I have to go somewhere else to book in my slot, for the screening call. And then I have to like, oh, by the way, then you still have to manually send the recruiter your resume. It's like, okay, I've invested 20 minutes into a screening call that I don't even know if I'm going to get to the second interview here. And you haven't even told me why I might be a good fit for this role or whatnot, right? It's like there's now like this mindset going into that first interaction of, okay, like I'm clearly not working with a tech enabled firm, right? I think as consumer tech gets better and the day-to-day lives of candidates is more, right, enabled by tech, the expectation is that the people they work with offer a certain standard of experience,
Yeah.
right?
But why do you think companies, and I'm generalizing here, I see companies getting all these different tech, and I'll stick to HR, whether it's
Hmm.
internal or agency,
Yeah.
to enable the filling the role, right?
Hmm.
So if I come back to staffing agencies, so you get tech in because you need to fill this role, you got to, you got deadlines, you got to
Hmm.
meet with a client and everything else.
Hmm.
So use tech to do all of that. But I can't help but feeling a lot of them miss that critical, don't really spend that same level. And I could be wrong, but I can't help but feeling a lot of these companies are not spending enough time in that whole due diligence process that I was talking about. Do I need to know this? Do I need to that? Looking at it, well, hang on a second. If I implement this, what impact does this have on my client that doesn't pay me an invoice, i.e., candidates,
Hmm.
right? So I don't know. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I mean, I see so much more investment on, yeah, what you were talking about, right? Getting roles filled or business development, right? That's where we
It's
focus, right?
important. Yeah.
Those are the two areas that we help with automation
Yep.
are, yeah, candidate sourcing and engagement, and, BD, like client acquisition, right?
Yeah.
So, and we do that because we know recruiters are happy to pay for it if it works. If I was to go build technology in the area that you're talking about, I don't have enough data to tell me that I'm going to be able to sell that product if that's my
Good
only
point.
value prop. Because again, like we as humans are naturally kind of short-term thinkers, and we're kind of, if it's not immediately obvious how it affects our bottom line, I think it becomes a bit of an afterthought. And then I think there's also like a lack of awareness on the friction of the candidate. Like if you ask a lot of recruiters, like, hey, how's your intake process or your due diligence process? They say like, oh, it's standard. It's probably fine. Meanwhile, it's not great at all. I don't think you'd meet many who are like, yeah, it's terrible, and I just don't plan on improving it. Right? I think it's just harder to put yourself in the shoes of your client and see what it's like to work with you through their lens. It's the harder thing to do. Whereas
Yeah.
it's very easy for me to know if I can fill a role 30% faster, I can fill more roles and I beat competition to getting the role filled. It's
You're right,
very
because
easy.
whether I'm sitting as a third party agency recruiter, my client is company X. If I'm an internal recruiter, my client is department head X, right? So
Hmm.
we're always looking at it, who's our client,
Hmm.
right? And it inevitably ends up being the hiring manager if you're internal, hiring company if you're external. And
Hmm.
you know, I get it. I'm yet to find a technology that really solely focuses on that 100% on that front end, because to your point, a lot of these ATSs are out of date and they're not cheap,
And
right?
there's cheaper options now that I think are quickly eating market share very, very fast.
Interesting. But then there's that whole data migration piece that comes into it, right?
Yeah,
Um, hey, look, I
yeah.
know we're kind of going over time. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing I would leave any recruiter at any agency for is like, and again, I try to take the optimistic view of these things, but there is an inherent risk, right? That comes with not at least spending a part of your week now investing in your acumen around these tools, right? I'm not saying go tomorrow and buy Talin or buy some other AI powered tool, because if you don't, you're screwed, right? It's
Kind of
really
are.
about, I think if you do nothing, you're screwed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's about say, hey, I'm going to take 5% or 10% of my work week from here on out, and we're investing that into upgrading our acumen and our tech stacks with the goal of efficiency. I like I said, my fear for any agency who doesn't do that is you were the agency making 2 placements per recruiter per month. The 5 per month agency AI enabled is coming, and if
Yeah.
you don't compete with them, you'll be phased out. And you can study history; it's happened to so many industries. You know what I mean? But that's the pessimistic view. The optimistic view is the opportunity here for what you can do is pretty amazing. Let's say you're a
Love that.
$5 million a year firm, you could not hire anybody, and I think you could become a 10 or $12 million a year firm.
We've done that.
That's the gold at the end of the rainbow. So
We've done that. We've grown without adopting tech, without having to increase headcount, right? We will increase headcount once
yeah.
we see the gaps on the tech, right? But you're right. And I really am appreciative because you allowed me to ask my quote unquote dumb questions. I'm not a tech person.
Oh,
A lot of
not
people
dumb at
are,
all. Not dumb at
right?
all. These are great questions, the right questions to be asking.
Because people expect people like me to know the answer to everything. The truth of the matter is, I'm not a tech person. I can tell you everything staffing search, or 100%. I can talk about that till the cows come home, right? So you've got to engage somebody
hmm
that understands their niche and their domain.
hmm
And I guess what I'd say to anybody listening to this, don't be ashamed that you don't know tech. Hey, I've just sat on my own podcast and told everybody tech's my weak point, but I surround myself with individuals who are experts in that, right? And that's what you need to do.
That is a great approach.
Yeah.
It's hard to lose if
Yeah.
you do that. And I think that's part of mindset, right? That's an action that is a result of saying, I need to be open-minded to this. I need to put in the effort to be better at this. And what you're saying is a great way to go down that path.
Yeah. You're the expert in whatever domain you're recruiting in. That's your value add, not the fact that I'll go back to the car analogy. It's got an engine. I know I need to know whether
Yeah.
I'm putting petrol in
200
or
and
diesel.
280
Yeah.
horsepower. Who
That's it.
cares?
Yeah, I can get in. I wanted a remote starter. That was my prereq, right? Must have a remote starter.
Yeah.
But I don't care
Yeah.
how. I just need to know that it works, right? And it's the same with this. Listen, if someone's listening to this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way to get hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. I am super active on LinkedIn. You can add me, Julian D'Angelo, Talin on LinkedIn. Feel free to email me, julian@talin.ai as well. But yeah, send me a connection request, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn. I'm super, super active there and happy to help with whether or not you're looking into Talin, you have any questions about AI, tech stack, anything like that. Like, I just love to kind of talk shop and meet awesome agencies. So yeah, please feel free to reach out.
Amazing. And if all that fails, reach out to me. I will connect you. Julian, thank you ever so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Thank you,
Take care.
Suki. Awesome chat. Great to be here.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye for now.
listening to this episode of Talent Titans, brought to you by Recruitment Professional Forum, where they're building a grassroots community for professionals and leaders in the recruitment industry to collaborate, advocate, and advance the profession. If you liked or were inspired by what you heard, make sure to follow, subscribe, and even leave a review. It lets more talented recruiters like you find the show. Until next time, keep on being a Talent Titan.